Okay, so good evening, everyone. For those who are logging on for the first time, my name is Roshana Ramdas, Project Lead for the Not On My Watch initiative, and welcome to day 2 and the final day of our workshops. Today, our facilitator for this evening's session is Inspector Lystra Bridgelal from the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. Lystra Bridgelal Police, attached to the Gender-Based Violence Unit, has worked at the Southwestern Division General Policing Organized Crime Narcotics Bureau, which has been renamed to the Special Investigations Unit, Homicide Bureau of Investigations, Criminal Investigations Department, and is currently attached to the Gender-Based Violence Unit. The holder of a first degree in Information Systems and Management with honors, has a postgraduate diploma in Business Administration, and is currently pursuing a master's, in Business Administration. I would like to thank everyone for being here today, and please enjoy the session. I will now hand you over to Inspector Bridgelal.
Okay, good night, everyone. Thanks so much for that great introduction, Ms. Rosanna Ramdas. What I'm doing is I'm going to present first on Gender-Based Violence Unit and a little on the child protection aspect of things, and after I will open the room, as it were, for any questions that you all may have, right? So without much further ado, I'm going to start. Right, so firstly, I would like to give you all a little rundown on the Gender-Based Violence Unit. Now, the Gender-Based Violence Unit was launched in January 2020 by Commissioner of Police, Mr. Gary Griffith. Gender-Based Violence Unit officers are stationed in all 9 divisions throughout Trinidad and Tobago. Right? What makes us different is that we did not treat intra-family violence and domestic violence as crimes prior to this so much.
Recording in progress.
Because traditionally, Trinidad and Tobago views domestic violence crimes as something that is a family issue. Right, but with the advent of the Gender-Based Violence Unit, which is now under the umbrella of the Special Victims Department, we treat domestic violence as a criminal issue, right? Because prior to this, the police did not want to get involved in any family and couple business, right? Now, this is no longer the case. We have made a lot of arrests, and we will continue to make arrests, and we are going to charge perpetrators who commit offenses that is related to any sort of domestic violence. The unit is staffed with both civilians and police officers, because whilst we understand the need for offenders to be charged, we also understand the need for preventive work within the community, because we together join with other stakeholders so that we will provide a total all-rounded service to the population of Trinidad and Tobago. So we have engaged persons like Victim and Witness Support Unit, the Office of the Prime Minister in acquiring safe houses, different agencies within the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, and all the different activists that you see from time to time that are assisting in any domestic violence issues within Trinidad and Tobago. The Gender-Based Violence Unit has employed a case management model in dealing with domestic violence victims in the community. So therefore, we will follow up with both the victim and the perpetrator on an ongoing basis. We also look at the protection order. I'm sure everybody is familiar with the protection order and the consequences for breaching a protection order. We at the Gender-Based Violence Unit, we work with the perpetrator as well to help them in understanding their role in the relationship and how they can work towards a healthy conflict resolution. Because whilst we may arrest and charge perpetrators, remember these persons, it's a family issue sometimes. A lot of times they continue after the court matter has been ventilated in the court. So we need to make sure both sides are safe. Right? Policies for officers to make arrangements. We also make arrangements to transport victims to a place of safety. We at the Gender-Based Violence Unit do that, as well as provide any shelter, and the location is unknown to the perpetrator and any third parties. So if we provide the facility of a safe house, this is a confidential thing that nobody knows unless there are other agencies that needs to assist. For example, when the police carry the victim to this location, the police will make checks from time to time to ensure that the victim is safe. However, this is a area whereby the perpetrator will have no knowledge of where the victim is to ensure the victim's safety. Now, we at the Gender-Based Violence Unit, we have effected approximately 250 arrests since the launch of the unit and counting, because every day we make arrests. So we always add to this, right? It is our hope that through criminal punishment, also community outreach and social worker interventions, also protection orders designed to protect victims through the threat of civil or criminal legal sanctions, and spreading awareness of gender inequality and its effect at Gender-Based Violence Unit. So in addition to arresting perpetrators and bringing them before the court, we do lectures as intervention strategies. We assist, we have a collaborative effort with social workers. Also, we enforce the protection orders with the assistance of the courts. So if somebody breaches a protection order, that person is arrested and locked up and brought before the court. We also lecture and spread awareness so that people will know what exactly is gender equality and what exactly is domestic violence and all the assistance that we can provide for them. Because this is a big social issue, as you all well imagine. So we can eradicate this stain on our social landscape and protect the lives of our nation's women and men. From time to time, unfortunately, you all have seen in the news, social media, in the newspaper, electronic, printed news, unfortunate circumstances like murders, crimes against victims of domestic violence. We are here to try to curb that and to eradicate it so that Trinidad and Tobago will become safer. Right? A lot of people ask this question, what is domestic violence? Now, domestic violence is not just physical violence alone, like if somebody cuff you down or somebody take a cutlass and chop somebody. Domestic violence is not only that. Domestic violence is any behavior, the purpose of which is to gain power and control over a spouse, partner, girl or boyfriend, or immediate or intimate family member. So domestic violence could also be psychological, it could be financial, notwithstanding physical abuse, emotional abuse, all of those things are categorized as domestic violence. There are different types of abuse. And when I say that, I mean there's control. For instance, if your partner is controlling you in such a fashion that you feel intimidated, that is a type of abuse. Physical abuse, the obvious physical abuse where that hurts or physically interferes with somebody's health or well-being. There's also sexual abuse, emotional abuse and intimidation. Like if your spouse or your boyfriend keep on insulting you and telling you all sorts of things that will cause you to have a breakdown in your self-esteem, right? So that is a form of emotional abuse as well. There's also isolation. A classic example of this is, for instance, if two people are living in a same household and one person, usually is the male, wants to have control and dominance over the female, they would tend to isolate them from their family or friends. So their world revolves around them. And that provides a sort of a insecure and fearful feeling with the victim, right? There's also verbal abuse, coercion, threats to kill. We have a lot of those, unfortunately, and playing the blame game, blaming the victim. The victim feels that he or she is responsible if the perpetrator attacks them and tells them all sorts of things, that it is your fault. It is your fault why I hit you. It is your fault why I cuffed you down yesterday. It is your fault why I take up the cutlass to chop you. Those types of verbal abuse, it creates a sense of fear and apprehension in the victim's mind. Also using male privilege. Well, there are plenty instances of male chauvinistic behavior, whereby, say for example, a female person is feeling threatened and the male person will issue certain threats. You can't go anywhere, stay home, why it is you're going by your family and friends and all of those sorts of things, and sort of restrict movements. So that in itself is also a type of abuse, and also economic abuse. A lot of times the male person or the abuser, it could be female too, the abuser withholds money and financial assistance for simple things like buying groceries, paying medical expenses, paying tuition fees for children, all of those sorts of things. So that as well is a form of economic abuse. Now, the police arrest and charge a lot of times when perpetrators breach the law in accordance with the Domestic Violence Act, right? There are some common offenses that we always arrest for, right? There's assault by beating, which is under Section 4 of the Summary Offences Act, Chapter 1102. There's also assault occasioning actual bodily harm. Now, this is calculated to interfere with the health or the well-being of a victim. And when I say that, I mean things like broken bones, like you cuff down somebody, so their eye is swollen, there's contusion, there's bleeding, their body's battered and bruised, things like that. Those are categorized as assault occasioning actual bodily harm. There's the more serious aspect of it, which is under Section 30 of the Offences Against the Persons Act, 1108, that is whereby person's bones are broken if they spend some time in the hospital, serious injuries, very serious injuries. There's also the breach of protection order. The breach of protection order is under Section 20 of the Domestic Violence Act, Chapter 45 of 56. The breach of protection order, the conditions could be, the conditions range. The conditions could be like a respondent is not supposed to stay within 300 meters of the applicant, that is the victim I'm referring to, or don't issue any threats or anything that constitutes domestic violence. Do not curse or use obscene language. Do not harm the person. Do not physically assault the person. I have seen some protection orders whereby the person is mandated to stay in one area of the house because a lot of times it's husband and wife or spouse or boyfriend and girlfriend, and they share the same living space. So those type of things are mentioned in the protection order when it goes before a magistrate. So once the magistrate imposes those type of conditions, whereby the magistrate is of the view that the victim is in harm, and then after the perpetrator goes and breaches this protection order, he is liable to be arrested and charged for the offense. Once the victim gives a statement and we have enough evidence, we bring the matter before the court to be dealt with the fullest extent of the law. There's also malicious wounding, which is Section 14 of the Offences Against the Persons Act, Chapter 1108, and that malicious wounding I'm referring to, like if you chop somebody, so blood flows, the skin is broken. A lot of times we experience this, unfortunately, as well. This is a common type of domestic violence offense. Now, please be minded, domestic violence is not the charge, right? The offenses that I'm outlining here, that is the charge. The domestic violence is the broad perspective of what actually happens. These are the offenses. The offenses is what we charge for, and any breaches of the protection order. There's also choking, which is Section 15 of the Offences Against the Persons Act, Chapter 1108. We always say this, the TTPS tagline, if you see something, say something. We want survivors and friends and relatives to feel confident when making reports and working with the Gender-Based Violence Unit. We have engaged in projects and new initiatives to help build this requested confidence. Coordination of the police, civilian staff like yourself, advocates like yourself, right? Like I said, the Office of the Prime Minister, Victim and Witness Support Unit. There's also community policing. There are stakeholders, business persons in the community. I have seen STAG came out and they had an advertisement. They are advocating against domestic violence. So a lot of companies, they are activists, service providers to address these individual cases. We have also developed a multidisciplinary response team that coordinates efforts from other government agencies. Also, the development of task forces to explore solutions to systemic issues with police responses. So it's not just us, it is the civilian aspect of the larger population of Trinidad and Tobago as well, who renders assistance, and that is a very, very important part in the whole scheme of things. Now, unfortunately, we have a lot of victims of domestic violence, right? And sometimes an offender is being abused over and over and over again. Sometimes you find yourself in a position where you cannot think, where you're fearful in an environment, you don't know what is going to happen next, right? So I'm going to go through a little safety during a domestic violence incident. Firstly, know the easiest escape routes from the house, doors, and windows. Also plan a safe place to stay in advance that is known only to yourself and your children, right? This is for obvious reasons, so the perpetrator would not know where to find you. Identify a neighbor you can tell about the violence and ask them to ring the police if they hear a disturbance coming from your house, right? Also develop some sort of code or signal between you so they will know you are in danger. This could range for a lot of different things. Some people would hang a piece of cloth or a towel at their window of a certain color, like a purple towel or something like that, and that will alert your neighbor that you are in danger, right? That is the fastest way to seek assistance because that is the nearest help you can get. Right, what to do during a domestic violence incident, do everything you can to avoid serious injury. Because sometimes your perpetrator is twice your size. Sometimes your perpetrator is much stronger than you are, right? If you have an opportunity to leave the situation, leave if possible. Please keep your mobile phone with you because sometimes victims run out the road and they don't have any means of communication. If it's 2 o'clock in the morning, it's difficult to communicate with persons. Based on the crime situation now, hardly people would open their window, open their door to render assistance. So keep your phone with you, make sure it's fully charged, call the police as soon as it is safe to report the incident. Might not be able to do it one time, but please, if you have your phone or you have other means of communication, you can do it in the shortest possible space of time. Tell the children they must not intervene if there is violence. A lot of times I have seen this happen and it leads to devastating consequences. Sometimes the children are very small and they're trying to defend mommy, they're trying to save mommy, and daddy's attacking or the spouse is attacking and they end up being harmed in the process. So let your children know, or if you know any domestic violence victims, re-victims, let them know the situation where they need to keep their children safe as well. Decide ahead of time a safe place where children can run or hide when they feel unsafe. It could be in the garage, it could be somewhere in the house where the perpetrator would not think to find them in the first instance. So ensure that you discuss this with your children before or whoever. If you know of a domestic violence victim, let them know these little safety tips. It may save their lives. Right? Teach your children to ring 999 and rehearse with them what to say in advance. Sometimes in emergency situations, people freeze. If you train your children on what to say, you will get the assistance as quickly as possible. Also teach your children their full name and address as well. For domestic violence victims, unfortunately, what happens is we have re-victims of domestic violence. Internationally, research has shown that a domestic violence victim goes back to the perpetrator and the abuser at least 7 times before some of them think of leaving, right? We don't want to go down. Sometimes it leads to more serious consequences, but generally this is the case, right? So if you are considering leaving an abusive relationship, please plan where you could go to be safe. It could be family, it could be friends. Sometimes persons are embarrassed, but your safety is of paramount importance. So let us look at that in terms of saving lives. Try to take the children with you if you can. That is most important because they cannot defend themselves. Keep a small amount of cash, your mobile phone to make emergency calls, house keys, essential medication, and important papers in a place for easy retrieval. right? Sometimes people leave without their house keys, and then after the house is locked, you cannot access important items because most times you have to go back, right? So let us remember these things. If you do leave, you can request the police to accompany you back to the house to retrieve your personal possessions. We always provide assistance in respect to these type of things. Do not put your safety at risk to retrieve your property or possessions. Like I said, you can always go back and get this stuff at a later time. Right, I'm going to post up now. I hope everybody's seeing the screen. These are our different locations whereby the gender-based violence unit, which is currently being formed under the Special Victims Department, not fully formed as yet. These are our numbers. So if you know of any domestic violence victim or anyone wants to make a report, these are the areas we are located at the divisions. We have Bessel Street Police Station in the Port of Spain division, and these are the contact numbers here. 623-1395, 625-8802, and 623-5173. We also have Northeastern, which is also located at the Bessel Street Police Station. 623-1395. Also Northern Maloney Police Station. 643-6504, 646-2947. Eastern is Sandy Grande Police Station, 688-2444. Western Caranage Police Station, 681-4169. Southern is Gasparillo Police Station, 650-0200. Southwestern is Labre Police Station, 648-7444. Central is Chagonas Police Station, 665-3200, and also 665-4294. There's also Roxborough Police Station in Tobago. Right, I'm leaving it up for a couple of seconds so you all can access the numbers. Okay, when an emergency report of domestic violence is made to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, this is what happens. The call is dispatched to the relevant emergency response patrol unit. The first responder on the scene, that is the first officers on the scene, will make initial observations to determine whether safety is an issue. Sometimes we're in a volatile situation, sometimes the police in a volatile situation. So we need to assess the situation to see which is the best option. Sometimes the victim is in imminent danger, so we need to exercise safety in bringing the victim to an area where we could take the report properly and ensure that the victim himself or herself is also safe. We will de-escalate the situation, ensuring the safety of the apparent victim. After this, preliminary interviews are to be conducted with the victim and alleged aggressor and any other persons who may have witnessed the incident. In order for a matter to go to court, we have to talk to all the persons who were involved, take a statement from the victim and any persons who were there. Also, we have to separate the victim from the aggressor and also interview them. So different persons will be doing that. If there's a position where the aggressor barricades himself in the house or into an area with other potential victims, the first responder must assess the potential risk and can exercise forced entry under the Domestic Violence Act. Police have the power to breach and enter somebody's house if they are strongly of the view that the life is in imminent danger of a domestic violence victim. If no immediate safety concerns arise, assess whether children are at risk. If safety and protection issues arise relative to the children, the officer must call the Children's Authority and remove the children from any potential risk. So we also seek the assistance of the Children's Authority, and they will be able to provide a safe area for the children to stay in the interim. An interview must also be conducted with the victim out of hearing of the alleged perpetrator. Because when you are interviewing the victim, a lot of times the victim is terrified. So you need to separate the victim from the perpetrator to ensure that we get the full facts of what is actually happening. In de-escalating the situation, the first responder must remove the alleged perpetrator from the scene and have another officer interview him or her. Notes must also be made in the officer's pocket diary in accordance with Standing Order 16 of the Police Service Standing Orders, and contact information to be collected from persons in the immediate vicinity, especially those who may have witnessed the incident. These are standard procedures that the police must do in responding to a violent situation. Right? In the instances whereby the first officers on the scene are not gender-based violence unit, that happens. If it is gender-based violence unit, the police are going to do the same thing. However, if that is not the case, it will then be referred to the gender-based violence unit and an investigator is assigned. The investigative process begins by collecting crucial evidence. So what we will do now is photograph the injuries of the victim. If they need to be hospitalized or taken to the doctor or taken to seek medical attention, we will obtain medical reports. We will take statements from all the persons involved there as well. And of course, a statement from the victim outlining what exactly transpired. Detention of the accused if necessary. In these instances, police have the power of arrest without warrant. Also, previous reports or incidents are to be highlighted and statements recorded. For instance, if a victim was abused by this perpetrator before, when the police is interviewing the victim and taking the statement, we will also record the history of domestic violence if there is one. And in so doing, that will assist. For instance, if a victim wants to obtain a protection order, that will give the magistrate an idea of what are the conditions to impose on the protection order. Charges will be laid if the evidential standards are met. And also, the final thing, the matter is brought before the magistrate, and then the complainant, which is the police who charge it, will follow up with the witnesses to ensure they are part of the process and are not frustrated into not giving evidence against the accused. So what the police do is do follow-up and welfare checks on the victim to see that the victim is okay, communicate with all of the witnesses as well, so that it will be a smooth process and everybody will be engaged in the process to bring the matter to a successful conclusion in the courts. Also, we have a domestic violence amendment as well. The Amendment Act inserts for the first time the use of a risk assessment tool, which is a tool to determine the potential for reoffending and for use of lethal force. It will provide the court with guidance as to the scope of the protection order, just like I mentioned before. And in addition to that, when the police interviews the victim and the perpetrator and realize, look, these people have a history of domestic violence, and this is something very serious, they will flag it. They will flag the perpetrator on what type of violence was used before, and that is going to also assist the court in determining how to treat with the matter. Right? Section 8C inserts the use of a tool by stating the court may, for the purposes of determining whether or not to grant a protection order or to impose one or more of the prohibitions or directions specified under Section 6, may order a police or social worker to submit a risk assessment as may be prescribed by the regulations. The amendment Section 27 inserts this, which provides for the purposes of determining whether or not to grant bail, the court may order a police officer to submit a risk assessment as may be described by the regulations. Right? This is also used to deal with perpetrators, so that we don't want the perpetrator, if he is arrested and released, we don't want him to go back and harm the victim. A lot of times they go back to the victim and they harm the victim even more seriously. So in order to prevent this from happening, the police need to be very, very vigilant and alert. There's also the maintenance of an electronic national domestic violence register, which creates an obligation on the Office of the Commissioner of Police to establish and maintain in electronic form a national domestic violence register, which will be available to all police officers to allow for real-time tracking of potential offenders. There's also the emergency protection order. Based on the amendment now, we have the facility whereby an officer who is of or above the rank of assistant superintendent, they can make an emergency application to the court. And a lot of times this happens in public holidays and weekends because the court doesn't sit on public holidays and weekends. So we have that facility in the police service now. If there's a situation of serious violence whereby the victim is in harm or in danger during those type of days, the police officer of or above this rank can make an application to the court. The practice of police officers applying to the court is not new. However, the section applies and allows senior officers to directly approach the court on behalf of a victim. So we have an additional tool which we can use for domestic violence victims now. There's also mandatory reporting where there's a duty to report domestic violence on persons who may encounter victims. And like I said before, if you see something, say something. So it also creates an offense for a person who fails to report a domestic violence issue. So this is a new avenue for police officers to charge persons. So please, people, if you are seeing any violent situation happening, right, you don't have to go and play hero. If you cannot deal with the situation by treating with the perpetrator at that point in time, you can just quickly call the police and the police will respond. Bystander intervention. Now, bystander intervention is a key aspect of this thing as well. We as citizens must know how to intervene in a situation, essential to becoming an active bystander. Well, like I said before, you don't have to get directly involved because sometimes the perpetrator might be twice your size, like I said before. Nothing is wrong with that. You can bring attention to the situation by doing other things. And by doing these other things, it could save someone's life. So you can do different actions. There are 4 Ds of bystander intervention: direct, distract, delegate, and delay. These are different ways you can choose to intervene in a situation. So if you assess the situation as a bystander and see the most comfortable way that you can deal with this issue, please be minded you need to take your safety into consideration as well. Safety is of paramount importance, right? When you are looking at bystander intervention, do not put yourself in an unsafe situation. The ideal bystander approaches persons as a friend, right? In a volatile situation, the bystander is honest and direct. If you can try to de-escalate the situation, don't use violence because that may escalate the situation, create more serious harm, right? It might antagonize a situation. If there are persons around, ask for help. Sometimes people see victims of domestic violence or any sort of violence for that matter, and they move away. Especially with domestic violence, a lot of persons still have this stigma, that husband and wife thing. Well, we don't get involved in that because tomorrow they will be hugging up and they will blame us. Please do not look at it like that. The crime dynamics of Trinidad and Tobago is escalating, right? So if you leave something and go about your business, it may lead to somebody being killed, somebody being seriously harmed. So please assess the situation. Know when to call for assistance. If you see a situation you cannot deal with, walk away and call 999. Make the report. Please make the report. It might save someone's life. So notice the situation. Look at it, interpret it, see what measure you can use to provide assistance, what measure of safety you have to treat with for yourselves, right? If you are deciding I am going to intervene, take the full responsibility for it and assess how exactly you are going to help to actually intervene in the situation. Sometimes I have done it. A lot of police have done it as well. You speak directly to the perpetrator or the target. Other persons who are not trained or who are a bit fearful, you can distract the person or create a way out. Get another person to talk to the perpetrator. And that could create a time frame whereby it's a delay and it may prevent something more serious from happening. Bystanders to domestic violence and sexual assault may witness an actual incident of abuse or sexual violence. And we use the by example. Somebody might be drunk and taking advantage of a victim, right? Somebody might see a family member having bruises. Do not ignore these things, because if you ignore it, it will escalate into something more serious, and the victims are going to continue being victims, and they are going to continuously be hurt. If you hear somebody screaming from a neighbor's home, don't turn a blind eye. Try to find out what's going on. A simple call. You could call the police. Call the police and explain, look, I'm hearing some screaming and shouting by my neighbor's house, and I feel that somebody is in harm, and the police is going to respond. Being an engaged bystander may mean intervening in violence that is already occurring. If you have assessed the situation and feel you can't deal with it like that, and you want to take the chance, well, that is your decision to make. Go ahead. Follow your instincts. If the situation feels wrong to you, it probably is. One way to decide it is to ask yourself, if I don't act, if the situation is going to get worse. So like I said, that is a personal decision, and it depends on how you look at it. If you evaluate that that is the best way to intervene, then do so. Safety is key in deciding when and how to respond to domestic and sexual violence while it is occurring. If the situation is already violent and it looks like it's escalating quickly, like I said, call 999. If you have decided you can safely intervene, create a distraction in an indirect and non-confrontational way. You can disrupt the situation just by talking. Sometimes you strike up a conversation with the perpetrator and you're just talking about mundane things, you know, and it works, right? You don't talk about, hey, you're barging, and you do it in a confrontational way. That is the wrong approach. So you could probably just strike up a conversation, and in that way, it will create a distraction, because your goal is to prevent a situation from getting worse. You can also buy time to ensure that the victim is okay. So this distraction could work, right? You could tell the victim, your car getting wrecked outside, or somebody calling you by the gate. Look, the neighbor calling you for something, right? And you could stay with the person while the victim go and check it out. If that is a viable option, by all means. If time is of the essence, speak out and say what's happening is not right, and reassure the victim that they don't deserve these actions. If you can approach the victim, let them know you are concerned and ask if anything is wrong. Let them know about the free and confidential help for victims. The numbers that I posted before, please be minded. And if you can't remember them, if there's any domestic violence offense that you need to report, or any crime for that matter, you can always go to the nearest police station and make that report, or call 999. If you don't feel comfortable talking with someone or distracting them to look for someone who might be able to intervene, you can use somebody like the bouncer, somebody like somebody's friend. You can use those people to be the intermediate between the victim and the perpetrator. Before you go out, create an exit strategy for uncomfortable situations, whether it's checking in via text messages, signals, or formulating an exit plan, right? That is a good way to treat with situations. Chat about different scenarios and how you want to respond. Go it over with somebody, go it over with a police officer, ask what if scenarios. What if this happens? How should I treat with this? What if somebody come and approach me in the middle of the night and they want to block the road? How should I treat with it? So you will know, it will click in your mind if you are in a position of harm, so you will have an idea how to respond. If something doesn't feel right, ask yourself, how might this situation affect the people who are involved? Could it get worse if you don't do anything? If yes, evaluate the best way to respond. We all know that intervening can be tough if you feel your actions have to be a major act of heroism, like fending off an attacker. Like I said, it don't have to be that. But if you can't do it, by all means, do it. But if you feel that that is too difficult for you to do, or it is beyond you, just call for assistance, right? I was also asked to talk a little bit about the Children's Act for the safety of children. Now, in introducing this part of it, our nation's children are very precious to us, and we need to be minded of these things. Sometimes you see children in a position and you really wonder sometimes what is going on. A lot of times we see children begging, they are disheveled and dirty, they're not going to school, they don't have proper guardians, they are being harmed and things like that. If that is the case, if you notice something like that, please make a report to the nearest station and the police will deal with it and engage the child protection unit so that we can render assistance to provide a safe place for that child, right? A place of safety. A constable, public officer qualified in social work, government employee, or a person acting in the interest of a child may take that child to a place of safety, right? Such person shall notify the authority, parent or guardian, or a children's attorney if things like these happen. The child who is taken away to a place of safety will seek a place of refuge in a place of safety and will remain there unless the authority advises otherwise or that person is brought before the courts. The Children's Act, as we know it, is 2012, and in that, a definition of a child is someone who is under the age of 18. Right? If a person has responsibility for a child and willfully assaults or ill-treats that child, or procures the child to be assaulted or ill-treated, neglected, or abandoned, or creates sufferation or injury to that person's physical, mental, or emotional health, or an infant under the age of 3 dies, or death was not caused by any disease or medical cause, or the person was at the material time under the influence of drink or drug, that person commits the offense of cruelty to a child, right? For the purposes of this, a parent, a person who is legally liable to maintain a child will be deemed to have neglected that child in a manner that is causing injury to his or her health. So we need to be minded that children needs to be provided with adequate food, clothing, and medical aid or lodging. And if that person refuses to do so and is in a position to do so, then that person is liable to be charged. If having been unable to otherwise provide adequate food or clothing or medical aid, that person failed to take the reasonable steps under the law, that person is liable to be charged for that offense. Right? The only way that person could get off of that is if he was unable to identify or provide for the child because that person was of infirmity of the mind or body. In other words, if they were incapacitated, right? So that is an offense under this section, right? And the likelihood of such suffering or injury to health will be obviated by the action of another person, right? So this nothing in this section, you could still discipline your child, you know, right? You can still discipline your child. So nothing in this section shall be construed as affecting the right of any parent, teacher, or other person having the lawful control of a child to administer reasonable punishment. Reasonable punishment is just enough to discipline a child. If it borders on something else that is injurious or harmful to the child, then that person is liable to be charged. Now, these persons under the Children's Act are persons in position of trust. And when a person is placed in a position of trust and they commit offenses like that, they are sentenced higher, right? The charges are higher. And that will be a constable, a medical practitioner, doctor, nurse, social worker, teacher, scoutmaster, troop leader, clergyman, spiritual leader, driver, sports coach, trainer, or other person in authority that the child was placed in care of. The doctors are in a position of trust because of the nature of the special relationship they have with parents. So these crimes committed for sexual penetration is as serious as life imprisonment. Other crimes, sometimes it's a fine of 50,000 to $50,000 and to 15 years imprisonment. It could be less, but the maximum is 15 years, right? Crimes that do not involve penetration, that will be imprisonment for 25 years, right? And when I say sexual penetration, it includes the insertion of any body part or object into a child's body, the insertion of any part of a child's body into that person's body as well. And when I say bodily orifice, that means your anus, vagina, urethra, mouth, ear, or nostril. Sexual touching is also an offense. That is where the touching is sexual and the child is under 16 years old. Other offenses are sexual penetration, sexual touching, paying for sexual services of a child, causing or inciting prostitution. That happens a lot too. So we need to be mindful of what we are looking for in terms of these type of crimes. Also causing or inciting a child to engage in sexual activity with an animal or engaging in sexual activity in the presence of a child. Causing a child to watch sexual acts or luring of a child. Also, female genital mutilation, and aiding and abetting, counseling or procuring a female genital mutilation. There's also child pornography. Now, we have something under the Children's Act called the Romeo Clause. If there's an offense whereby the child is 16 years or over who commits the offense, but under 21, that child is not liable for sexual penetration or sexual touching if he is less than 3 years older than the child, or not family, or in a position of trust, or not of the same gender. Right? Circumstances do not reveal any element of exploitation, coercion, threat, deception, grooming, or manipulation. Right? Sexual grooming, this is something that is relatively common. It has to happen on at least 2 prior occasions. And this happens a lot on the internet. So you need to monitor, parents, you need to monitor your children when they are on the internet. A lot of times they meet predators online because parents are not monitoring what the children are viewing. There are a lot of very attractive websites that you open up and it is concealed in such a fashion that you wouldn't really know at first sight. It has predators who are communicating with children. So they communicate by using electronic means as well. Make arrangements to meet the child or travel to meet the child or persuade the child to travel. So when a person is sexually grooming a child, he or she will arrange for the person whom he reasonably believes to be a child to travel for the purpose of meeting the child or the person within Trinidad and Tobago or elsewhere with the intention of doing anything to or in respect of the child during or after the meeting. In other words, it could be a sexual act. It could be any offense under the Children's Act. And in this instance, the person will commit an offense and is liable to be charged. Right, under the Sexual Offences Act, there's also mandatory reporting of sexual offenses against minors by certain persons. So therefore, if the parent or the guardian of a minor or anybody who has custody or charge or control of a minor or has temporary custody or charge or control of a minor or a teacher in that particular capacity does not report a sexual offense, whereby, for instance, if the child comes and makes a report, they are liable to be charged as well. Also, a medical practitioner, a psychiatrist, or a psychologist. Social workers and the owners, managers, or employees of a nursery or a daycare or the principal, guidance counselors, and anybody who has reasonable grounds for believing that a sexual offense has been committed concerning that minor. We need to make that report to the police as soon as possible so that the police could engage in investigating this report and bringing the perpetrators before the court of law if an offense has been detected. Right, so that's the end of my brief presentation. And I'm now going to open the floor for any questions that you all may have. Children need to be spoken to in a more softer way and a different way. So sometimes it is difficult, but once the police officer takes their time and bonds with the child, usually we are able to be successful in talking to the child to find out what's wrong.
Another question, what is the current charge for violating a protection order?
It varies. It depends on the discretion of the magistrate. Sometimes it's 6 months, sometimes it could be a year, sometimes it could be more than that. Sometimes you get a term of imprisonment and a fine. So it depends on the seriousness of it and the court that it is before.
Christopher, I saw your hand raised. I don't know if you want to type a question in the chat, but in the meanwhile, another question. In the instance of a child lying about an incident which was reported, what happens after?
But child lies about well, firstly, we operate on the premise based on the investigator that the child is talking the truth. But if we find out that the child is not talking the truth, then that person has to be re-interviewed at a later date. So the police are going to do a pre-interview to ask certain questions, and some of the questions would lead up to what exactly transpired. And sometimes we engage the assistance of Children's Authority in interviewing the children to ensure that they are comfortable and they are speaking the truth. If after all these things the child is not speaking the truth, if we have determined that, then we will put the investigation on hold and re-interview the child. But other than that, that is how we treat with that aspect of it. So sometimes it is difficult to tell, and sometimes, children need a little extra nudge. We usually put them in a safe environment with someone who they can trust of the same gender. And we have professionals who usually are able to get these things out properly.
Okay, so if a mother leaves her children due to a domestic violence issue and fears for her safety, so does not return for a few days, what happens to the children she left behind?
Well, that situation, firstly, 3 days is a pretty long time. So if there's a domestic violence situation, the mother has the responsibility to ensure that the children are safe. Now, the police are going to take into consideration if it's an issue of domestic violence. If it's an issue of domestic violence and the mother needs to let the police know what's going on, and the police will accompany the mother to go back to the area and ensure that the children are safe, so that it is the responsibility of the parents to let the police know what's going on, because we have all the facilities to provide that extra shield of safety.
Another question, what is done when a summons is repeatedly not being served?
If a summons is not served, the magistrate could engage the police to go back and serve the summons again. Sometimes if a summons is repeatedly not served and the matter goes before the court, a warrant could also be issued. It depends on the situation and it depends on the type of offense there is. So there are two different instances whereby this happens. So it could happen either way. A lot of times when a summons is not being served, we are the gender, if it's a domestic violence situation, we are the gender-based violence unit, will assist personally in serving those summons. So if anybody has any issue with respect to that, you can also go to the nearest police station and ask to talk to a senior officer, and the senior officer will engage you and render assistance as well.
Is there a time frame to report domestic violence?
It depends. It depends on the issue. There is not a time frame to report domestic violence, but if there are offenses that the domestic violence brings out, there are some aspects of it whereby summary offenses, in order to bring somebody before the court to charge them, we have the statutory limitation of 6 months, right? And those are offenses like assault by beating and malicious damage and throwing of missiles and things like that. So it depends on the category of the offense. Whilst there's no limit to the time frame to report a domestic violence incident, you can report a domestic violence incident anytime. It's better to do it as soon as possible to get the best possible assistance from the police. And if there are some summary offenses whereby you need to bring those matters before the court properly, we have that 6-month avenue for the simpler matters.
Can a social worker by himself remove a child to a place of safety, or do they go to the police first? What are the prescribed steps?
The usual steps is to go to the police first. The social worker will also render assistance from Child Protection Unit and Children's Authority. And then in collaboration with these entities, then the child will be removed, because remember, it has to be an assessment of what's going on there. And with the assistance of Children's Authority and Child Protection Unit, the safety of the child will be properly assessed. And after that, then the child will be removed if so required.
What can be done if a victim is too afraid to visit the station to report? Can a report be made with citizens' receipt over the phone?
If a victim is too afraid to go to the station, of course, you can call via phone. You can also engage us on the TTPS app. It's just go online and download the TTPS app. Remember, a long time you had to dress up and catch a taxi to come and make a report at the police station. That is no longer. So you can download the TTPS app and type in your report, and there's a delegated team of officers who will refer the matter appropriately. For instance, if you're making a report in penal, they will refer it to the Southwestern Division Gender-Based Violence Unit, or if any other offense, the nearest jurisdiction. So what I'm saying is you can call by phone, you can go and make the report personally in the station, or you can also access the TTPS app online and make your report there. Please be minded also that if you download the TTPS app, you need to fill out all of your information properly. And there's also a button called the panic button, a SOS button. If it's an emergency, you can press that as well, and that will also engage the police in terms of emergency.
With respect to sexual grooming of a child, at what point of a person's observation can it be reported?
Once you feel that that is happening, you can report it at any time. And you give the police the information, and the police will go launch an investigation to see if that offense is highlighted. And once it have enough ingredients for that offense, then the perpetrator will be dealt with according to law. You can report it anytime. Even if it does not constitute sexual grooming, we will keep an eye on the offender. So once you feel that something like that is happening, it is your responsibility to report the matter.
Okay, so this is not a question, but some feedback. Thanks for another informative session. I must say your points were spot on. I've heard a couple of them in domestic violence situations I've had to involve myself in. And now I think I'm fully equipped if ever a situation arises again.
Much appreciated. We are here to help 24/7, so you can engage us anytime. I'm glad. If I have touched 3 persons on this meeting, I have touched a lot. The ideal situation is to get everybody on board. So I'm glad that you have expressed those sentiments.
Is that it for questions?
Able to access any of the questions. Persons who want to engage me as well, you can unmute your mic and speak. No problem with that. That is great as well.
I've read out all the questions in the chat for you, Inspector.
All right, no problem.
Then that was the last of it. Okay, another question came in. Can someone else report on behalf of a victim?
Yes, anybody can report on behalf of a victim. Once we have the proper information and the contact number of the victim and the residence and the report, the police will respond. Anybody could make a report on behalf of anybody.
Okay, is that it for questions? Any more questions?
Hi, there's one person. She wants to know, can you explain the Romeo clause again?
All right, the Romeo clause, just now let me pull it back up here so I can explain it properly for you here. Of the Children's Act. If a child is 16 years or over, but under 21, that child is not liable for sexual penetration or sexual touching. If he is if the perpetrator is less than 3 years older than the child, right? Against whom the offense is allegedly perpetrated. What we are looking at here really and truly is the fact that the age difference is not very great. And once the age difference is not very great, then that person has a defense more or less if an offense like this happens, right? So, so that is basically it, is the fact that the child is 16 years or over, but under 21. And if the offender is less than 3 years older than the child relative to the offense, then that is what we refer to as the Romeo clause, right? Also, if the child is 14 years or over but under 16 years, is not liable for sexual penetration or sexual touching of a child if he is less than 2 years older than the child whom the offense allegedly perpetrated. Also, the same thing, not in a family relationship or not of the same sex as the child. So that is what it is. The Romeo clause is really highlighting the closeness in the age of the children. So that is like a defense for the sexual penetration and the sexual touching. We take that into consideration. Normally, I have a lot of questions. Normally, I'm bombarded, but you seem to be very quiet in this one.